Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Soka. I'm co-chair of PEER, and welcome to PEER's October meeting on safeguarding our elections with Larry Norden from the Brennan Center. We're thrilled to have Larry back with us. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I want to let you know that PEER is a progressive East End reformers. We are a chapter of the statewide organization NIGHTPAN, and our organization focuses on social justice issues. We target, in particular, healthcare, housing, and issues really that affect the health of all Long Islanders. Tonight's format, we will have Larry from the Brennan Center, introduced by Catherine Levy, to discuss really a critical part of the upcoming election. How can we safeguard the fact that the election will be counted accurately after the fact, after the election is over? So Catherine Levy will be kind of guiding his discussion. I ask you if you have questions during the discussion with Larry, if you could just post them in the chat. And then when Larry's finished, we will go to the questions and answers in the order in which they were posted in the chat. Afterward, we're going to have a brief overview of the propositions that are on the ballot and also how you can engage in getting out the vote over the next several weeks. So I'd like to turn it over now to Catherine Levy, who will introduce Larry. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see so many wonderful activists here. Larry has talked to us before. He's always incredible, and I would imagine this is going to be a particularly interesting meeting. I'm just going to give a very short biography. He's the sort of person who has a biography that's much too long for the tiny amount of time we have. Lawrence Norden is vice president of the Elections and Government Program at the Brennan Center, where he leads the center's work in a variety of areas, including its effort to bring balance to campaign funding and break down barriers that keep Americans from participating in politics, ensure that U.S. election infrastructure is secure and accessible to every voter, and protect elections from disinformation and foreign interference. His work has been featured in media outlets across the country, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and National Public Radio. He has testified before Congress and several state legislatures on numerous occasions. Larry, I so appreciate you joining us here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Sure, you must be very busy. I'm going to begin with a very big, possibly too big question. I know there's a lot going on, but what do you see as the greatest threats to election security and integrity in this election?
Thanks both Catherines and to PEER for including me in the conversation tonight. Let me, before I answer that question, let me take a step back and say, in many ways, we're in really good shape when it comes to the election. As I think folks may know, Chris Krebs, who was the executive director for CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that is in charge of security for our elections under Trump in 2020, said 2020 was the most secure election we've ever had. And since 2020, we've only, I don't want to say we've only made improvements, but we've made a lot of improvements to put us in good shape going into Election Day. So in terms of like confidence in the election system, I feel pretty good about it. And while I'm sure folks have heard around the country, not just in the past 4 years, but certainly since at least the Supreme Court in Shelby County struck down part of the Voting Rights Act, there have been a lot of voter suppression laws that have passed. And I don't think there's any question that that has resulted in a dampening of turnout among voters of color. There have also been a lot of very pro-voter legislation that has passed around the country, particularly in the past few years, including in New York, of course. So all of that is good. I'm increasingly worried about the period after the election. And I can talk about why. I mean, obviously, a big part of it is that we have somebody that's running for president that has made clear if he loses, he's not going to accept the results. And we all remember January 6th, of course, and everything that happened after the 2020 election. But more broadly, I think there's been there is a concerted, organized, well-funded campaign in a way that there wasn't going into 2020 to undermine people's faith in the elections and to try to undermine the outcome of the election. Although I don't think it will be successful legally, it might be successful in terms of further degrading people's belief in our democracy. Anyway, those are my concerns. I do want to provide the balance, and I can talk about this a little bit too. There's been a lot of preparation for 2024, also in a way that there wasn't for 2020. So when we think back to 2020, there was Rudy Giuliani and the Four Seasons and kind of some crazy claims about bamboo ballots. Like, the effort this time is much more sophisticated than that. And so I would say my number one concern is disinformation about the way the election system works. And everything that I think about that concerns me, whether it's the litigation, there are over 100 cases that the RNC and affiliated election denier groups have brought, and there are more every day, and I can talk a little bit about them. They're really not geared to win. I don't think they've won a single one of them yet, but they are geared, I would say, three things. One is to spread conspiracy theories. The second is to tee up challenges to votes after the election. And I can talk a little bit how they may do that if folks are interested. And then the third is to kind of cause chaos and delays post-election. There's a new law that was passed, the Electoral Count Reform Act by Congress, that was meant to try to prevent some of the shenanigans that happened in 2020. But I think some of the folks that are bringing these lawsuits are aware that they're very hard deadlines now because of that law. So the elections have to be certified by December 11th. The electors picked by December 11th under the Electoral Count Act now. And on December 17th, the electors meet to vote. And if they don't, the state loses its electoral votes. Right. So I think a lot of what is going on with these lawsuits is trying to set up the opportunity to say that the election can't be certified. I don't think they will succeed in that legally, but I think that's their hope. And their secondary hope is just to create so much doubt that a lot of folks won't accept the results of the election. So anyway, that was a long way of saying, and that's just one piece of the disinformation that's going on. I think it's we have X, formerly Twitter, that is things that just didn't exist in 2020. That platform now is a font of false information in a way that it wasn't before. All of the social media companies have cut back on their trust and safety teams. So there's just much more false information that is being spread. The groups that are behind a lot of the election denialism, Cleta Mitchell's group, which is called the Conservative Partnership Institute, that does a lot of the training of these poll observers that are going to go out. They're so much better funded than they were in 2020. In 2020, I think the budget for her organization was $7 million. This year, it's $45 million, right? And that's just one of many groups now, Stephen Miller's group. And they're all also connected to all of this litigation. So, and then of course you have Russia and foreign interference, and they're using AI and everything else. All of this makes it much more difficult. It's a kind of overwhelming the false information around our elections, and it's going to make it much more challenging. And the post-election period.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I do see that there have been a couple of important victories in Georgia, and I
Yeah.
think it'd be helpful for you to describe them. And then if you could just talk about other states where there are issues that are going to impact certification, where there is litigation or challenges. But the Georgia one.
Yeah, and I do want to say I'll talk about Georgia and the good decisions, and I'll talk about where there are concerns. I do want to say I also want to talk about the good things that are happening, because that's just my nature, I guess. And I think it's important to talk about some of the positive things that are happening right now. And as I said, these 100 lawsuits, they've been losing all of them. So for folks who don't know, there was also a good decision in Alabama today and Nebraska. But in Georgia, obviously in 2020, Donald Trump tried to get Brad Raffensperger to find 11,000 votes to change the outcome of the election there. And he didn't do it. And so as punishment, the state legislature created this new state board of election and stripped him of a lot of his powers. So the state board has been completely crazy. Its members, a majority of its members are conspiracy theorists, I would say. So there are actually two decisions out of Georgia, and the one that I think has gotten a lot of attention is, but it's been misreported. The state board passed a requirement that at the close of polls, and this goes to the point of like just delaying things, right? Because this would, at the close of polls, before they could run the ballots through the machine, they had to hand count them. Now, the way it got reported was that I think a lot of people thought they actually have to hand count like all of the votes, which is not what they were requiring. They were just requiring that you had to count the number of ballots and then check it against the number of people who have signed in. I think the reason for this was twofold. Number one, just to slow things down, although it wouldn't be days, it would just be several hours to have to hand count all the ballots in each polling place. But I think the other was to create a record that somehow, because they never match exactly, like people sign in and they don't vote their ballots, or they spoil ballots. I think the idea was to create more chaos, basically, and use that as a reason for challenging results. Anyway, there was a decision yesterday in Cobb County enjoining that order from the state board. There's another case that is simultaneously going on that the DNC brought, that I think was argued today on the same issue, which I don't really understand why. Anyway, it's going to get appealed, but I think there's a good chance the Attorney General and Brad Raffensperger, the secretary, have been opposing all of these actions that the state board has been taking. It's also taken the position that county boards don't have to certify the election results. They should conduct an inquiry before certifying, and if they find that there's anything that they don't like, basically they cannot certify. And the law in Georgia is like incredibly clear on this. Like it's not discretionary. The board has to certify. And there was a decision in Georgia. Was that yesterday? I can't remember. All the days are blurred right now. That they have to certify on time in Georgia. They can't. The counties can't. Wait. And again, remember, there's this December 11th deadline that is no longer optional when the electors have to be chosen. So I think part of the strategy here is to try to prevent that from happening potentially if people don't like the results. And so that's why that decision was so important. They can't delay past when they're required to certify in Georgia. I'm sorry, I was rambling. I forgot what the second part of that question was.
Mm.
I just wanted to know about those, what you thought of those two decisions, which seemed quite consequential to me. Do
Yeah.
you think that they're going to be appealed up into the Supreme Court? Is that what you think?
I think they might be there, and there's just a bigger bigger set of challenges to everything that the state board has done. You know, there's also yeah, there, I think there's a good chance that most of what the state board has been doing is going to be rejected by the courts in Georgia. As I said, the attorney general, the secretary are in opposition to the state board, and the chair, who was appointed by Kemp, actually gave an interview. The chair of the board itself, who was appointed by Governor Kemp, gave an interview to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution over the weekend and said that the board was going too far. So I'm hopeful that they're going to, all the kind of crazy stuff that they've been doing is going to get pushed back by the courts.
Is there anything else going on in any of the other significant states? I mean, I think we're all particularly concerned.
Well, as I said, there are over 100 lawsuits that have been filed by, it's the RNC, but it's also Stephen Miller's group, America First Legal. It's America First Policy Institute, which is Linda McMahon's group. There's the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which is connected to Cleta Mitchell. They're all filing lawsuits everywhere. Most of them are in the battleground states. I would say another significant thing that's happening, and the Brennan Center is about to get involved in this, but if you can believe it, there have been these lawsuits to question the ability of military and overseas voters to cast their ballots. So they've now brought lawsuits in Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, asking the court to I'm losing my memory here too. Anyway, set aside. There's a word that is escaping me. To set aside all the military and overseas ballots for really ridiculous reasons, but saying that we can't know. Trump tweeted something about how this is a way for foreign citizens and foreign governments to interfere in our election, because it would be so easy to send, which is completely insane, but it'll be so easy to send in fake ballots from other countries. So there are these lawsuits that would potentially essentially disenfranchise all the military and overseas voters in these states. And there are 3 already in 3 battleground states that I mentioned. I think there are going to be more. I would not be surprised to see them come up in Arizona and Wisconsin next. And, I mean, it's very political what's going on there. I think military and overseas voters, up until fairly recently, were seen as leaning heavily Republican, and that has changed. And the Democrats actually were quite public about the fact that they were making an effort to reach those overseas voters this election. And so Trump's reaction and then the reaction of these groups that are now suing to disenfranchise these voters seem to be in reaction to that.
And I mean, I've been reading about this particular issue. There was some indication that in some way the defense secretary could get involved in this. Is this just frivolous? There's nothing he can do, presumably, about it.
I don't know what he could. I mean, look, I think him publicly speaking out about this would be helpful, frankly. Mm-hmm. I don't know what more they could do. I mean, well, yeah, I don't know what. I mean, I doubt that the Department of Defense would intervene in the litigation itself.
Mm-hmm. Would they ever count the votes?
What's that?
Are they sequestering them for a time being? And
well, not yet, but sequestering is one of the words I could have used when I said set aside. But that is what they're suing to have happen. And again, like,
do they plan to count them at some point?
Well, so here's the thing. This lawsuit could have been. This fits the pattern of all of these lawsuits. This lawsuit, I mean, it's nonsense, but any one of these lawsuits in those 3 states could have been brought 10 years ago. They waited to bring the lawsuits until after the ballots were out, right? after people had voted, so nothing could be changed. Like the people have already voted these ballots in many places. They don't expect to win, but they are asking them for them to be set aside. And this fits with the other. There are a bunch of other cases where they've done similar things where they're like, just set them aside, and we can deal with it after the election. And of course, that's when things get very dicey, because then you know what the margin of victory is between candidates. And then when you're asking the courts to come in, they have that in their mind already. And that's where, if you're worried about the Supreme Court, that's where you might be a little bit more worried about how they're going to rule on something like that, where there's a certain number of votes separating candidates and there's a bigger set of ballots that hasn't been counted yet.
So this seems to me to be part of a broader attack on mail-in voting. You may disagree about that. It seems that way to me. I mean, there's the attack on the drop boxes, and there are all these changing rules in Pennsylvania. I'm sure you know what they are as of 6 o'clock today, but I'm not entirely sure myself about what can and cannot be. So if you could just talk about that general problem.
I mean, so I would say, there's an attack on mail voting in various ways. There is an attack on the voter rolls and saying that they should be purged. And again, like a lot of these lawsuits were brought after, and there was just a victory in Alabama that I referenced on this. It's too late to purge the rolls, right? Where it's less than 90 days before the election under the MVRA. You can't mass purge the rolls at this point. But that hasn't stopped them from bringing this litigation, saying there are non-citizens on the rolls, there are dead people on the rolls, and you should be purging them all off. It's not going to happen, but it gives them the opportunity to say after the election, it's my colleague says it's the veneer of legitimacy for all of these claims later. One of the things that is really interesting in 2020 was every state where they created a slate of fake electors, they had a pending lawsuit in court challenging the results. And they see that having that court case as giving whatever claims they have about not accepting the results legitimacy. And in fact, in New Mexico, I don't know why they filed an alternate set of electors in New Mexico. They didn't have a lawsuit, and they waited to pull together that alternate set until they could get the lawsuit filed in New Mexico challenging the results. So I think there is this belief that if they have a lawsuit out there, and I have to say their lawsuits, even though they're junk, they're much more sophisticated than they were in 2020. They can point to it. They can point to the experts. They can say, "We told you so," that this couldn't be trusted. And now look at the results.
So the people contesting the lawsuit is the Brennan Center involved in contesting the lawsuits, or the DNC? I know Mark Elias is doing things. Who are the people who are?
So look, the first people involved in the lawsuits are the states, right? And the secretaries of states and the attorneys general are defending the states for their processes. The DNC, yes, has intervened in a lot of these cases, including the Pennsylvania case that I mentioned. In terms of, yes, there are some outside groups, and as I said, I think we may be getting involved in this Pennsylvania case, but in terms of these kinds of cases, as opposed to the voter suppression laws, the groups have been a little bit less involved. It's more been the parties like the DNC or the RNC that have been involved in the litigation.
And I'm wondering in terms of comparing it to 2020. We got through 2020, and I guess that's the way we're going to live from now on. We're just going to try to get through election after election. How do two things that have worried me compare? The voter suppression efforts, in other words, trying to limit voting places and hours of voting, and harassment at the polls. I mean, I read, I think today or yesterday, that in Detroit, they're actually the Republicans are actually having groups of people planning on doing specific things that are going to cause chaos at the polls in Detroit. But, you know, there are a lot of sensationalist articles as well.
Yeah. So what was the first part of that again?
In terms of voters, you know, the typical
voter suppression. Yeah. You know, look, there's no question. As I said, the Brennan Center actually did a study on this, and it looked at specifically the states that used to be covered by the Voting Rights Act, and it showed that the gap between white and non-white voters in terms of turnout has grown over the last few years, but it particularly grown in the states that used to be under the Voting Rights Act, where they couldn't just pass voter suppression laws because DOJ would say that, you know, it basically had veto power. That's no longer the case, and since that's happened, it's grown everywhere, but it's really grown at twice the rate that differential. And you know, so that includes much of the South. That was covered by the Voting Rights Act. So just big picture, it's probably in those places is probably worse as compared to 2020. I don't know about that. I mean, as I said, there's been a lot of expansion since 2022. In some ways, COVID, you know, as a result of COVID, there were many more ways for people to vote in 2020, right? There was more early voting, there was more mail voting, and a lot of has gotten pulled back, right? And so there aren't as many drop boxes. Georgia eliminated a lot their drop boxes. So did Ohio. I mean, there's one per county or something like that. But it's still, you know, it's still easier to vote by mail in most of the country in 2024 than it was in 2016. And there are more early voting sites in 2024 than there were in 2016. More opportunities, more ways to vote. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, there's no question that there are laws that have been passed in states like Georgia and North Carolina that are specifically targeted at specific communities. That's different than the general picture for most voters. You know, on the harassment of voters and the organization of these observers, we'll see. It seems like every election cycle, certainly I've been working in this space, there are always reports that there are going to be these people that show up that are going to harass voters as observers, and it usually doesn't pan out on any big scale. Now, as I said, this year might be different. There's a lot more money behind this. It's a much bigger coordinated effort. We'll see. I will say, however, to my good news, my interest in promoting some good news is I think on the preparation side, there's been a lot of training of election officials and election offices to be ready for this kind of thing. The Brennan Center, with some other groups, has been supporting something called the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, which is a partnership of law enforcement and election officials. One of the problems that we saw after 2020, when these election officials and election workers were getting threatened so much, is that the police and law enforcement just were not prepared to really react or to help the election workers and election officials. There are many issues around law enforcement and elections, but it wasn't something that they were prepared to help with. There's been a huge amount of training, preparation, coordination of being ready for disruptions at the polls, being ready for disruptions post-election that didn't exist before. So I think, you know, my theme when I talk about this is things are worse, but they're also better. That there is this organized effort that is very troubling, but there's been a lot of investment in preparing for it in a way that just was not true in 2020.
So we know that I'm glad you were able to slip in your good news. I guess I'm in such a panic about this election that it's good. It's always you always come with some optimistic news. So we're all pretty certain that there's going to be an effort, if it appears that Harris has won, to keep state certification from going forward. Right? Am I correct that that's the principal danger that we're facing post-election?
Yes. Is it the principal danger? I wouldn't say it's the principal danger in the sense that I don't think it will be successful. I think in all the battleground states, we have secretaries of state who are going to want to certify the election results. And I know, again, this goes to my like bad news, good news thing. These election denialists have, in recent elections, they have been trying things out, right? And so they've been trying not they've refused to certify election results in a bunch of counties, and every time they've been shot down pretty quickly, right? The courts have come in and said, you don't have a choice. And maybe not only do you not have a choice, but you're going to get sanctioned for doing this. So there's like, in a way, for what I would call the forces of good, there's been a lot of practice that, again, didn't probably exist before 2022 for getting ready for this. And so I feel pretty good. I don't have any question, and I have my list of election deniers that are on county boards or are county election officials around the country. I don't have any question that there are going to be some counties and other jurisdictions that refuse to certify. But I think, the attorneys generals in those states are ready to go to court right away, and the courts are going to force them to certify. So all of that's a long way of saying it's a risk, not because they're actually going to get away with it. It's a risk because it's one more peg in this effort to delegitimize the whole thing. And I think, I'm not sure that the public is ready for seeing all these election officials. I don't think it's going to be that many, but to see like a bunch of election officials around the country saying they're not certifying the election results, right? Like, I think that is not, that's worse than we even had in 2020 in terms of people not accepting the results.
So I think the fear that many people have is that we're going to see a repeat in some way of 2000. And when the Supreme Court decided to stop the vote count in Broward,
right?
Obviously. And what I have heard suggested is if there can be enough chaos and doubt sowed about results in, let's say, 2 states that are pivotal states, not just one, that, and maybe you don't want to get into this kind of speculation about the court, but that it would be more likely that a highly partisan decision would come down about one state that was in sway. If say the election comes down to Georgia, Pennsylvania, one state, and they sow a lot of doubt about that state, and there's a lot of litigation that goes to the court inevitably. What do you see as the danger of that scenario of what a lot of us see as a highly partisan court basically striking down the election results?
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is, first of all, we're in better shape than we were in 2000 in terms of there are not going to be a lot of hanging chads. And we should be able to count the votes pretty quickly. I don't like this, and I think that this is where a lot of these lawsuits have been of like, and I said this before, putting aside a certain number of votes that aren't counted once the votes are counted, they're counted. There's nothing you can do, right? Once they're counted, you can't say it's no fair. These votes shouldn't, because you can't. It's not like you can pull out a bunch of votes and say like, okay, we're not going to count them now because this rule or that rule wasn't followed and the Supreme Court doesn't like it. Like it's too late. It's only if votes are set aside, like these upheld votes, and there are other ways that there are attempts to do that for certain mail votes, provisional ballots. That's when I get a little bit nervous, and I don't have a crystal ball, like, and I stopped making predictions a long time ago, but I hope we're not in the situation where it comes down to something where we have to put our faith in the Supreme Court for being as fair as possible in a dispute like that. I mean, I think it's just even if I had like the utmost faith in all of them, it just seems like a bad place for the country to be, and it's very hard to avoid it looking super partisan, especially if it's kind of decided on partisan lines.
So before I get to a question about what voters and activists can do, is there something either good or bad that's significant that I mean, I know there are many things going on, but significant that we haven't covered, do you feel? There are a lot of questions, so you're not going to be able to leave us very soon. But.
I think we've covered, I think we've covered the main things. As I said, my big points that I want to always cover when I'm talking about this stuff is the big danger of misinformation and how I feel like it's worse and every little thing gets blown up. How it's all directed to this post-election period and how that is a much more sophisticated funded operation than we've seen in the past. But that there really is incredible coordination and preparation in ways that I haven't seen before, certainly among civil society, but also in working with election officials. So that gives me hope.
So there are a lot of incredible activists on this call, which I'm very happy to see. And we're people who don't like to just sit at home and bite our fingernails. We like to do things. So
yeah.
Are there sites, do you think, in particular that people can go to that would help give them accurate information to fight the disinformation? I mean, for instance, masochistically enough, am on Twitter, and I try to fight disinformation on Twitter because a lot of people go to that site. And you said something about what voters can do in terms of early voting before everybody joined us that I think would be important to talk about. But anything that you think we as activists can do, because some of us are not staying here in New York, we're going to other states to help out.
Yeah, although I will say Eastern Long Island is pretty important in this election. And that's something that I think people aren't so focused on, but it's interesting. I think, in terms of control of Congress, it may be New York and California that decide that. So I'd say a few things. One thing is, I hate to be just touting myself in the Brennan Center, but that's what comes to mind first, of course, when I'm thinking about resources. But I'm putting in the chat, if you want to know, we're working with really the leading researchers on like which election rumors are circulating on social media. And we've done this thing where we're not only providing accurate information, but we're doing message testing. So we're working with election officials and others on like what would you say in response to when you hear this rumor? And it's very interesting. So we have like the poll results on like what messages work best in pushing back against the lies. It's not always what you would think. And you can really dig down and see, what's the message that works well in New York, which might be different than what works in Georgia. You can see what works for Latino men from 18 to 34, what works for the Trump supporter. So anyway, for those who are interested in getting on Twitter like Catherine and applying with the truth, some message, it's not only the truth that matters, sometimes it's how you say it.
Mm.
But the bigger question in terms of how to get involved, I am most familiar, obviously, door knocking, working for campaigns. That's like the partisan side. I'm not on that side. We are part of the Election Protection Network. Has anybody done the kind of nonpartisan election protection?
Yes. Yeah.
So that, I think Common Cause is running that in New York.
Mm-hmm.
But those, helping people when they're having trouble voting, taking those phone calls is definitely something that I would, and they're doing it now, right? Because as I said, millions of people have already voted and are voting. So that's something that people could get involved with. I'll just mention some of the other groups that we work with, who are on the ground, who I really like. AVIL, which is part of All Voting is Local, which is part of a leadership conference. It's like their local, do folks know the leadership conference on civil rights? It's like kind of the umbrella. Yeah. Anyway, AVIL is really a great organization that's working in the States on voting rights issues.
I'm sorry to interrupt. AVIL is
AVIL, All Voting is Local.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of the groups working with Latino voters in particular have been coming under attack. So I don't know if folks have seen like this horrible thing with LULAC, LULAC, but they were registering Latino voters, and in Texas, the Attorney General had like a search warrant for one of the workers' homes, and they broke into her house and took all her files because they were claiming that she was trying to get non-citizens registered to vote. But and I know they really feel under attack, and they do good work. And there's other groups like Voto Latino and Unidos, who we partner with a lot, who are on the ground working with voters and trying to push back against misinformation, but also activate people to vote. Common Cause is always a good partner at the state level. So those are some groups that, if folks are interested in volunteering or reaching out or donating, that I would recommend.
I think maybe we weren't going to do it this way, but I think just before we get to the many questions that people have, I've also been working with the Pennsylvania voter protection effort. I worked with them last time, and they're just terrific, and they're desperate for volunteers. So Jerry has put in the chat the different roles that one can play, both in Pennsylvania and from here in New York. You can be a poll observer, both inside and outside of polling places, something called a designated agent to help people who are disabled vote, get to the polling place and be able to vote. They have volunteer recruitment calls every Sunday and Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to recruit people in Pennsylvania who are going to, be on site for those of us who can't get there. And something that I did in 2020 that I found very satisfying, I was part of a ballot cure phone bank.
Oh, yeah, that's super important.
And particularly in terms of the confusion about absentee ballot voting. And it's not even partisan so much. Sometimes it's just incompetence. I mean, people were being given terrible advice about how to vote. So I was actually able to help some people save their votes. And I cannot tell you how satisfying that is, whatever the, well, I know what I want the outcome to be, but I mean, it's satisfying in any case. So I urge people who, and you can do a lot of this remotely, like the ballot cure thing you can do remotely, to please sign up. I do know that New York, the 19, 21, 22, and 1 and 4 congressional districts in New York are very important. But this voter protection effort in the state that we have to win is critically important. And there is so much confusion still in Pennsylvania about various aspects of voting that people are going to need help. And they begged me to make a pitch for them at this meeting. So
I have to say the ballot curing thing is like, it's remarkable how much of a difference that makes. Like you look at states that allow for ballot curing, and it's often a couple of percentage points of votes that get added because and I think a lot of people don't realize how often mail ballots get thrown out because somebody forgot to sign in a place or didn't put their birth date or the right birth date or mixed up the month and the day when they were writing the date or whatever. I mean, it's been shown, there are a lot of studies like that curing like has a massive impact. And when you're talking about an election that might be decided by a few hundred votes, that really matters.
And I mean, I have to say, I had one call with a man who was in his 80s. He told me he was Black, and he was about to lose his vote, and I helped him save his vote, and he was in tears at the end of the call. It really felt gratifying. So it's a great thing to do. Just if you believe in this, old-fashioned thing called democracy. So there are a lot of questions. How are we going to handle that, Jerry, Catherine? Are we going to have people ask the questions themselves, or are we going to ask the questions?
Tina's been monitoring the chat, and so she's going to step forward, Tina, and ask the folks
Yes,
to.
I believe some of the questions have been addressed. So I will ask the person if they still want me to ask their question. Catherine Zoka asks, could the RNC lawsuits make it impossible for states to vote by December 17th? I don't know that was addressed specifically.
So I don't think so. Look, if an election is super, super close, there might be challenges to reaching that date, but the courts actually, we and others have been doing outreach to the courts to get them to understand these deadlines and how tight they are. And some state Supreme Courts already have put out rules to make clear that they're going to resolve any election disputes super quickly, like everything is on an expedited basis. So Pennsylvania has done that, Arizona, I think Nevada, and my expectation is by the time we get to election day, you'll have seen that in most, if not all, of the battleground states. So again, I a while ago promised myself I wouldn't make any more predictions. So I don't want to say never, that never could happen, but I think it's unlikely to happen that the courts are going to take so long in resolving issues or allow the parties to drag things out so much that they can't certify in time to get their electoral votes counted.
Thank you. The next question was posed by Elise Antonelli. I believe it was answered. Elise, do you want me to ask your question again?
Was it the one about Georgia? That was answered. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you thank Diana. Thank you,
Yes.
Diana. Okay, from Nick Michelli, who's sitting next to me. I'm surprised about the degree to which most TV news is so pro-Harris. MSNBC, for example. Is this a unique situation in history, or has it happened before? Are there any FCC rules that limit this?
I don't watch TV, so I can't comment.
Okay,
Cynthia wrote, there aren't rules against the network being partisan.
Well,
So
that is for sure.
yeah, I thought there were some equal access to time.
There was, but that is no longer the case.
Oh, really? The equal access to time even?
No, that was, I think it was reversed under Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, the courts wouldn't, I don't think the courts would allow that. If somebody passed a new law, I don't think the courts would
Well,
allow
I'm happy with the way they're leaning, so what can I say?
it.
From Catherine Zoka, we have, in line with that, how will the hurricanes impact voters in Florida, North Carolina, and other states that were hit? What's being done to ensure that everyone can vote?
There's been a lot done. It's really been interesting to watch. North Carolina, I think, is the state probably most impacted by this, and both the state board and the state legislature have done a lot to make it easier for people in the hurricane areas to vote. So they changed the ID requirement rules in those areas, and they seem to be investing in making sure that they have new polling places where polling places, and being able to relocate polling places that have been impacted. Interestingly, the Trump campaign, we put out a whole bunch of requests for how they should be dealing with hurricane ravaged areas in North Carolina. And the Trump campaign came up with a list which is pretty much the same as the Brennan Centers, which is maybe the first time that has happened. So they're doing a lot. Certainly in North Carolina, the Brennan Center studied this issue before, and the interesting thing that we found is voter turnout is definitely impacted, can definitely be impacted by destructive storms like hurricanes, and the biggest correlation is not between how devastating the storm was to a particular area, but whether steps were taken to address the fact that poll sites were disrupted or couldn't be used, and whether a sufficient number of alternate sites were set up. So people find a way to vote if it's available to them, even in very hard hit areas. I'm a little bit less clear on what Florida is doing. I think Georgia's also taken some extraordinary measures, but obviously Florida has a lot of experience with hurricanes and voting after them.
And a lot of experience with not being very good about helping people vote too.
That is true too. Yeah. So, and I mean, in fact, in 2022, they did not really, that was one place where they didn't do much after the hurricane that hit before the election. And it definitely impacted turnout in Florida.
We have another question from Elise Antonelli. With what the speaker said about preparedness at the polls, are we equally prepared in the case of another insurrection?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm forgetting what the term is, but the Department of Homeland Security has already, I don't remember what the term is that they use, but they declared January 6th, and I think January 20th too, in DC, some kind of special security event. So there's no doubt in my mind they are prepared in a way that they were not on January 6th for disruptions. What I am more concerned about, and this I've been doing with my colleagues, a lot of advocacy at both the federal and the state level, is December 17th, December 11th, And the days in counting centers in battleground states, and actually not just battleground states, but where they're still counting the votes when the results are not finalized or the election has not been called. One of the things, the Brennan Center does a poll of election officials every year. And one of the things that has come out quite starkly is I think everybody knows here that election workers, election officials have since 2020 been under a lot of threat and disruption of their work. Election officials in majority minority jurisdictions report being threatened at a much higher level, report being concerned about safety at a much higher level. And I don't think it's any coincidence if you look at like Trump's tweets in 2020, he specifically called out Milwaukee, Detroit. I mean, this is literally like one of his tweets: Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, Philadelphia. That's where the fraud is happening. So people hear that, and it has consequences. And so I'm really worried, not so much about a January 6th, but I'm worried about, the armed folks who showed up in Maricopa County, Phoenix, and Arizona, outside of the counting center and places like that in the days after the election. And hopefully there will be enough preparation to make sure that those votes can be counted safely after election day.
Who do you think is preparing for that? State officials, the DNC?
I don't think the DNC is preparing for it. I hope it's the state officials. I hope the Homeland Security advisors in the states, the attorneys general, is coordinating with local law enforcement to make sure that they have enough people and that they know, like I think they're very prepared. And they've been doing a lot of preparation. There's been a lot of work through election day and being prepared on election day to respond to emergencies, maybe for a day or two after. But it may go beyond that. And so to be ready to make sure that they have funds available for overtime to pay people, and that they're doing coordinating. That's I hope they're doing it. But anyway, that's our advocacy. That's one of our advocacy goals for the next couple of weeks, is to make sure we're talking to the right people about that.
With the link that you gave us, Brennan Center series, election rumors 2024, because I'm sure there's going to be tumult after November 5th. Would that be a good site for us to visit to see?
Yeah, if you want, we're going to continue that after the election, because I think that unfortunately the disinformation might get even worse. Mm-hmm. So we are right now we are updating that, frankly, every few days. And we will, some of it, the stuff just repeats, right? So non-citizen voting, that is that's not going to be anything new. That's there. We every once in a while we will update with new research that we've done in terms of messaging. Anyway, but yes, we'll continue to update it.
I think there was another. Is ballot curing, this is from Cynthia Solwin, is ballot curing new in New York? I know it exists this year, but I had never heard of it before.
I don't think it's new, but I think when they expanded, but I may be wrong, when they expanded to allow no excuse mail voting, that was part of it, but I don't know. I don't know if anybody else does.
Catherine, was your question answered about state capitol disruptions? Or do you want me to ask it?
Yeah, well, why don't you ask that?
What about state capitol disruptions on January 6th or before?
Yeah. I think that's possible. Again, December 17th is the date that the electors meet at the state capitals. And remember, right now, the way the law is written, I would go to court, but the way the law is written, the electors have to meet and vote on December 17th. And if they don't, then the state loses its electors. So again, that's where I think that's the kind of preparation that I think state law enforcement really needs to be ready for, right? There might be motivation to prevent those people from meeting.
And I would advise everybody to read about the Electoral Count Reform Act because it's encouraging. At least at the federal level, it narrows the gap in terms of what can be done. It was intelligently, I think, what do you think, Larry? I think it was intelligently drafted.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that in the chat, Catherine?
Sure.
Okay.
It was passed in 2022, and it gives the lie to a lot of things that Speaker Johnson says about what he can do. I think it does, at least. But
yeah, it definitely raises the bar to another January 6th.
So I get the sense that you think that we're in better shape than we were 4 years ago. Do you not want to go that far?
Well, look, we're not voting in the middle of a pandemic, and I do think the network that is defending the elections is stronger than it was in 2020. But as I say, I feel good. I should like knock on wood or something when I say that, but I feel good about like our preparation through election day. I do think. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I'm very concerned about the volume and frankly the greater sophistication of the lies around the election process and what the post-election period may look like. And I think, I feel like my job, I don't mean this like literally like my job, but I just in general is not to be a downer about this stuff, but I think it's hard to deal. We don't know what the result of the election is going to be, but to the extent that there's an effort to try to delegitimize it, it's going to be a lot to deal with. It's going to be the Steve Bannon phrase is flood the zone with shit, and I think that's what we will experience if we have an election where one of the candidates loses and says, I'm not going to accept this. I think it's, and I think it's, again, I don't want to be like a super downer. I'm not saying like that means everything's going to fall apart, but I think it's going to be worse in some ways than it was in 2020, as bad as that was.
Well, I think it's better to be prepared. And I don't know if you said it when everybody joined the call, but Larry did say to us that it's better to vote early because you can avoid any complications and impediments put in your way. So particularly for our friends in the swing states, I think we need to urge them to do that.
Yeah, there's no question that, and this is one of the encouraging things that's happened over the last few years is having voting spread out over time means that there's no like one pressure point to really create problems. Something goes wrong on a particular day, you come back another day and vote. Hopefully the nightmare scenario is something really goes wrong on election day. That would be terrible, but if most people have voted at that point, then it's less damaging.
Right.
If I might interject, the other thing that's really great, there's a big push this year about voting on day one, because you are then removed from the voter rolls. I might be using the wrong terminology here, but the campaigns are no longer reaching out to get out the vote. You voted, they know that, so they don't bother and waste time, and they can focus where they really need to focus. The other thing in New York State is that first day of early voting is called the Golden Day, because you can register at the same time that you can do a provisional ballot. You can't vote in the machine, but you do a written ballot. It's taken back to the Board of Elections where they review, your registration, and your vote is counted if your registration is okay. So, this happened with the laws from this last session, legislative session. So that's a really nice thing and important to share with people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe I should have brought this up before, but one of the things that frightens me is a possible cyber attack on election day. Do you want to say anything about that, or would you rather not?
CISA, again, which is the federal agency that deals with election security and cybersecurity, has put out a couple of pieces to prepare folks for the potential for ransomware and for denial of service attacks. Their assertion, which I think is 99% right, is that if one of those things happens, it's not going to prevent people from voting or from their votes getting counted. It may be disruptive, and it may be a source of a lot of conspiracy theories. But for the most part, our system at this point, and again, this is no question, there's a massive improvement over the last few years. Our system is resilient to those kinds of cyber attacks. And one of the great successes in the voting space over the last few years has been the move to paper ballots. And 98% of Americans will have a paper record of their vote. So, in New York, if there was a cyber attack, and even if it reached the voting machines and shut them all down, or the e-poll books, you can still vote on that paper ballot and it'll get counted eventually. And that's true in most of the country.
Yeah, I'd like to just hop in and offer two things. The first one is if you do vote early and you're able to travel then from New York to Pennsylvania on the GOTV and help in Pennsylvania, that would be terrific. I know not everybody can get there, but I would encourage you to do that. And if you have any interest and want to learn more about that, please contact myself or Catherine Levy, and we can, connect you with locations in Pennsylvania that could use your help canvassing. The second thing is I wanted to mention, I did drop into the chat a couple of links to organizations that Larry has mentioned. All Voting is Local, Common Cause New York, and also John Avalon's volunteer page for CD1. I mean, I know John's got a tough race that he's facing, but I think he also has a good opportunity if we can get the vote out for him. And so he needs volunteers on the ground. If you can travel to Pennsylvania, if you could canvass or even phone bank, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Nick has another question.
Well, it's more of a comment, and I just was surprised by this, Lawrence. I didn't know it. The biography of Lincoln by John Meacham, which is the best biography I've ever read of him. You know that there were 100 armed people carrying the electoral ballots into the House when Lincoln was elected because they were afraid that the other party was going to try to disrupt them. And the title of the chapter is Violence at the Capitol. This, of course, is the beginning of the Civil War. But, and it is, in fact, it's happened before.
Yeah.
My interesting political comment is I was reading a biography of John Fremont, and at one point he ran against, I think, Buchanan to be president, and it all came down to one state, Pennsylvania.
Oh, God.
All came down to Pennsylvania. So
history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to add to what Catherine said that if you can't make it to Pennsylvania, there are these things you can do remotely, like this ballot curing thing and phone banking. I mean, really, we have to win Pennsylvania. I don't see how Harris wins if she doesn't win Pennsylvania. And I think for a lot of these things that we've been talking about tonight, if there's a large enough margin of victory, it will be less possible for the Republicans to challenge the election. Would you agree with that, Larry?
Yeah, no question.
Are they going to?
I don't have any. I'll say something, even though I'm not supposed to, I'll say something like slightly partisan. I don't have any doubt if Trump loses, he's going, I mean, he said it himself, he's going to be challenging the election results. It doesn't matter how much he loses by. But I think it'll have a lot less legitimacy. And frankly, I think as bad as 2020 was, the fact that there were multiple states, it wasn't one state. It wasn't just, he could have flipped Georgia and it wouldn't have mattered. I think that made it much more difficult for him and made it much less credible. And you know, all the stuff, the Supreme Court, but also just who was willing to stand up with him, it becomes more challenging the closer it is. No question.
Right. Well, Larry, thank you so much. You always make me feel strangely better. You really do. Well, I mean, you do talk about the positive things and the people who are fighting back, and you're certainly one of them. And so, and the Brennan Center does such a service. So I really appreciate your being here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm grateful for the invitation to speak to you all, and I am super appreciative of all of you and hearing all the things that you're going to be doing. I mean, you all are the people that make democracy work. I mean, we need folks who are the activists who are ensuring that people can vote and our democracy is protected. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
We're trying.
Okay. Good luck with your
Thank you
work.
all.
We're with
Thank
you.
you so much. So we
you.
we don't want people to leave though, even after Larry leaves. Catherine, Jerry.
Yeah, we're gonna shift over to Jerry, and Jerry's gonna tell us a little bit about the propositions that are on the ballot. So Jerry, please.
So the first thing I've done actually is in the chat, I have put a link, and it's the wording of Prop 1 on the ballot. And then there is a webinar on Prop 1. As a matter of fact, tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. that's being done if you want to learn some detail about it. I am not well versed on the proposition, but there are links on how Prop 1 protects our reproductive freedoms. And also there is a report that is fabulous that has come out about pregnancy as a crime. It's a preliminary report on first year after Dobbs, which could be quite interesting. So that's the thing on Proposition 1, which is our statewide proposition, otherwise known as the ERA. And I noticed in the news this morning that Governor Hochul, there was an editorial on her in Newsday, I guess it was, that she's promoting that everyone vote yes on that, which is important. There's a lot of opposition. No, I shouldn't say a lot. There's opposition to it and issues, but so this is more of where you can learn. And I was on a Zoom last night with Assemblywoman Rosenthal from New York City. And we had someone from the Night Clue was on, and a statistic that was mentioned, which I thought was pretty amazing, was that New York State has the highest number of women leaving to get abortions in other states. And they said, and everybody was kind of surprised at that. And it has to do with, there's a lot of Catholic hospitals or religious hospitals that have certain procedures, and it deals with the general councils of those hospitals as to how they restrict the health reasons to access to abortions. But that was just one kind of little tidbit that I thought was pretty amazing. So that's what I have to say about Prop 1. In the town level, we have a referendum. Let's see here. There is a Southampton town. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. East Hampton, there is a proposition. I will drop that also into the chat for you. This is it's about a roundabout that needs to be done, and property needs to be transferred in order to allow for this to happen. Apparently, it's very favorable, but that will be on the east ballot. And then we have okay, this is the Southampton Town Resolution. It has to do with authorizing the temporary alienation and discontinuance of community preservation fund parkland located at 43 South Main Street in Village of Southampton. I don't know, maybe Catherine, you can speak to this a little more intelligently.
Sure. Yeah, Jerry, I can. Basically, the Southampton Town Resolution, which I'm going to drop into the chat, has to do with the water quality at Lake Agawam in the Village of Southampton. And it basically allows for some swap of, I guess, property within the CPF fund. What I do know is that Lake Agawam has been quite polluted recently, and that this particular proposition is enthusiastically supported by Dr. Chris Gobler, who is with the Southampton Marine Science Center and has been a terrific environmentalist over the course of his career. So I feel that that's an important proposition for Southampton town residents to support. And regarding the East Hampton resolution, again, they want to create a roundabout, which will really help with the traffic flow there, and that is fully supported by the East Hampton Town Board.
I just want to add that on the Proposition 3 in Southampton, people who are against it are very concerned about closing down Pond Lane, which is a major street in Southampton that brings you from the estates down to Main Street by the lake, right by Lake Agawam. And if they close that off, people are concerned that traffic will build up all around in the estate area.
You mean the people who lives in the estates will have traffic?
Well, not just those people. It'll cause more traffic.
People going to the
And
beach.
also there are people, I have a friend who owns a store on Main Street, and she just doesn't want to lose Pond Lane. And I understand that. I mean, I can't argue with her that it's more important to save the lake, but there are people who just want that street to stay there.
Well, there certainly are people who are going to oppose it. I just wanted to raise the fact that, Dr. Chris Gobler, who we've had on peer meetings in the past, is really an important environmentalist in our community. He, supports that fact. And I'd encourage people to look into it further. I'll drop into the chat in a moment some more information about that.
And there's a meeting, but I forget the date. I'll try to send it, put it in the chat.
I think
I have something.
Francesca has something to say.
Yeah, I want to say something about, actually, I've been trying to look for the link myself about Prop 1, but I have a way to tell you how to do this. You can get 100 very nice, very solid, free, they're like palm cards about Prop 1. Yes, on Prop 1, that come in like 2 days. To hand out if you're canvassing. The thing is, I can't find the link, but Joanne Young, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Do you guys all know her?
Yeah, Joanne.
Yeah, Joanne. She would have the link if you wanted to email her. They're very nice, and you can get them in 2 days, and you can hand them out. I see so much disgusting propaganda by the no votes. These people who don't give a shit about girls and women saying, save girls sports. I mean, it's of course ridiculous. So she would know how to do it if you want to reach out to her. And I really highly recommend that people do it. You can leave them in the library, you can hand them out, whatever.
Can I add something to this?
Here she is, Joanne.
Topic? the Suffolk GOP has gotten Trump signs and vote no on Prop 1 signs. And wait, here's how they're doing it. Any Republican can sign up and gets 2 free Trump signs, but they must also take a vote no sign. And they have to put them both together and take a picture of both signs together and post it on their social media. And that went out to everybody in the GOP.
Wow.
Great.
Okay.
All the more reason to keep getting people, make people aware of what's, of Prop 1 and voting for the ERA. So, Sherry, do we have any more information to share?
I don't. I'm done.
Okay.
I mean, NIPAN just did a
I'm
big.
sorry, Catherine, I just want to say that I did drop into the chat information about Prop 2, the county water quality proposition, and also for Prop 3 about in Southampton Town, the Lake Agawam. Sorry, go ahead.
NIPAN just did a big mailing about Prop 1, and unlike the time when the constitutional amendments were defeated, there is a lot of information out there about Prop 1. So I don't know what will happen in Suffolk, but I hope in the rest of the state it will pass. But
yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks everyone. A special thanks to Catherine Levy for being in discussion with Larry, and for all of you out there. We hope that you, between now and Election Day, you will all be engaged in making sure that we can do everything that we can to get the House blue, get Harris in office, pass these propositions. And I will send out to everybody the comments, not the comments, but the links that were dropped into the chat so that you'll have that information. So thank you all very much.
Sharon has her hand up. Catherine, Sharon.
Okay, go, Sharon. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself, please.
I have the link for the yes on New York Prop 1, free stickers and palm cards.
Oh, great.
You're closing up, so I'll just tell it to you.
Can you drop them in the chat?
Well, does that get closed though when we stop?
I just put it in the chat.
People can grab it right now from the chat.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to, it might be easier for them to grab it than if you read it.
I just put it in the chat, Catherine.
Oh, excellent. Okay, yeah. Okay, Joanne just put it in the chat. So it's under her name.
There you go.
Okay,
so
that's
everybody
it.
wants, just click on that right now, and the website will come up, and you'll have that information.
Right there.
Catherine, is there a link to the chat, the whole chat?
There you go.
There should be a way for each of you to copy the chat. You can, they used to be able to do that. You can take but I will save the chat. The chat is being saved, and so that the chat can then be sent out to everybody who signed up for the meeting.
That would be great.
You can save the chat by clicking on the 3 dots next to it, but any link that is words, not the actual link, doesn't show up in the saved chat.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for doing this. And also, whoever found that link, thank you very much.
Yeah, cool. All right, everybody.
Okay, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well. Have a good evening.
Check the vote, guys.
Bye, everybody.